Yesterday was the final Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners meeting of the year. And obviously there was a lot to look at. They're looking at the budget coming up next year. That's obviously going to be a big part of the conversation. They're looking at the homicide numbers, the trends there. Tom Whittaker, he is the president of the Board of Police Commissioners, joining us on KCMO Talk Radio. Tom, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. So let's just start off with the request I know from KCPD for about a 20% increase in the budget to $420 million. Even many of us who are very much pro-police are probably looking at that and saying, well, it was about $260 million a few years ago. Now we're looking at $420. What is that increase for?
Yeah, so let's break it down. When you look at the overall budget, it comes from three different areas, and the first and most significant part of that budget is from the city's general fund, and that request is for $348 million. That's not too inconsistent with what has been requested in prior years. Of course, it's coming at a time when we know that the city has financial challenges. But when you look at that amount coming from the general fund, about a 16% increase over what was requested last year. And like I said, fairly consistent with what we've seen the last 5 years. Over 12.5% of those costs relate to things that are outside of our control, things that are required expenses. So, for example, the biggest number there is almost $11 million going to the pension. Health insurance is $7.3 million. That is about a 13% increase year over year of what we paid last year. One big thing that is going to impact this budget is a 27th pay period. That represents about $6.6 million, and that's just a factor of how the calendar plays out with our payroll cycle. So that happens every few years, and unfortunately it happens next year in our next fiscal year. So there are a number of other things like that. I will tell you that budget also includes a request to fund 50 additional sworn members and funding for 10 additional call takers and 20 dispatchers.
Okay, so it really is about just, in many ways, these are fixed costs that, there's not much you can do with, obviously. You're talking about pension money and health insurance and a 27th pay period based on how the calendar falls. So it's things that you don't really have a choice on, obviously. Now, the pension deal, that's something I know the city's kicked the can down the road on for many years. So why the big hike in pension costs?
Well, that's determined by the actuaries. So again, as you say, that's outside of our control. So we must fund the pension relative to the members that we have and people who are expecting those pensions. And so the actuaries come in and tell us, given our current payroll and our hiring, what will need to be contributed to that plan to keep it funded for their future retirements. Okay,
so $348 million is coming out of the general fund. The other, I guess it's about $75 million. Where would that money come out of?
Yeah, so then about another, 35 or so million, a little bit less than that, come from other city funds like grants, the combat tax, the public safety sales tax, other grants that we were able to get. And then on top of that, to get up to the total 417 includes other grants that we receive. Some of those are donations, for example, from the Kansas City Police Foundation and others. So that's what gets you up to the total of 417.
Gotcha. Okay, so that number then, once it gets through the Board of Police Commissioners, it will then go to City Council next year, where they will either approve or deny it?
That's correct. And so it's this period of time where conversations between our executive services, the police department's executive service, that is, and the city finance department to go through the budget and have meetings with all the council members so that they can understand what the issues are, what the needs are, and try and land on, like we have every year up to now, an approved budget approved by the city council.
So Tom Whittaker is here. He is the Board of Police Commissioners president in Kansas City. I looked up 23-24, that fiscal year. The police department had about a $270 million budget. We're looking at, obviously, potentially up to $420. That's about a 50% increase, even for many in Kansas City who are going to be pro-law enforcement. A 50% hike over a 3-4 year period. I know some of these are fixed costs, but what would you say to concerned taxpayers who love the police, but they're still saying, gosh, 50% increase? Their wages aren't keeping up at that pace. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I'd have to go back, and I'll take you at your word that that's accurate. That sounds about right. Keep in mind a couple of years ago what happened when Missouri changed its statute, allowing the police department to increase the starting pay for our officers. It had been capped at an amount that was below what area departments were paying. So we were toward the bottom of the list when you compare our starting salary to others. And so we took a big jump up, and we're asking to continue to increase that so that we can provide a competitive salary and compensation package for our officers so that we can attract that talent. When I go out and talk to people in the community, the one thing I hear is, how many officers are you down, and when will you be able to get back to full staffing? Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to do. And so a lot of that increase comes to increasing the pay so that we can attract talent.
All right. Now, I know that a big topic of conversation, too, was some of these homicide numbers. Kansas City right now has 131 homicides from January 1st through yesterday, December 16th. And, I hate to talk about it like it's just a number because we all want to get that number as low as possible. But that is down from this time last year at 143, down from 2 years ago where we were at 174. That was a record year for homicides in Kansas City. So where did that conversation go yesterday, and what do you attribute some of these decreases to?
So we do focus on that. I look at that daily, and of course, it's a big topic of conversation at our monthly board meetings. I don't think you can attribute those results to any one thing. I would highlight a couple of things. If you look at the chief's crime plan that she put in place a few years ago and staying disciplined to that, particularly on the focused deterrence, and one of the initiatives we have there is the Save KC model, where a coalition of people in Kansas City, not-for-profits, service providers, along with law enforcement and our county prosecutor, come together and identify those who are at risk or have a greater likelihood of being involved in a violent crime, and reaching out to them and illustrating to them that there are resources for them to make lifestyle decisions and change the course they're on, or illustrate to them what will happen if they don't make those changes. That plan in and of itself is, we are seeing the data of the positive impact it is having. And I think that's one of the contributions toward that lower homicide number. I would also highlight, look at the clearance rate that we have. We are today at 75% clearance of our homicides. That is well above the national average. That's important. We look at that because it tells us, one, how strong our investigations are and how thorough and complete they are and successful at clearing these cases. But it also illustrates the trust that the community has with the police officers to come forward to bring the evidence that we need in order to clear those cases.
Is that maybe also attributing the work being done by the new Jackson County prosecutor?
No question. Prosecutor Johnson is at every one of our board meetings and providing the progress that she is making with her department. And yesterday, she gave a very positive report, not just an increase in number of cases that are being charged, but also the increase in convictions that her department or her office is obtaining. That's significant.
Are you sensing renewed trust between the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office and KCPD, which you well know that relationship was in the toilet for a few years?
I think there is a level of trust there that is on a very positive trajectory. I can tell you that Chief Graves and the prosecutor talk regularly, and whenever an issue arises, they have that relationship so that they can communicate openly. And it's not just with the prosecutor and Chief Graves. It's also throughout the whole investigations, and the prosecutors assigned to different elements within KCPD so that they can proactively start looking at these crimes and building cases.
All right. Tom Whittaker, he is the president of the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners on KCMO. Tom, we appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us here for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me. Have a safe and happy holiday.
You as well. Thanks so much. Tom Whittaker, he is president of the Kansas City Board of Police Commissioners on KCMO Talk Radio, 95.7 FM.